Namaskar. Today, let's discuss about the judicial power as a strategic actor, not just interpretation, but agenda, delay, and design. Let's first discuss the introduction on breaking the taboo. Today, I want to say something that is obvious to every serious student of the state, yet rarely spoken openly. Judicial power is not passive, it is simply interpretive. It is not just a referee in the constitutional stadium. Judicial power is a strategic actor, and once you understand this, you start seeing why India moves the way it does, why certain reforms accelerate, why certain controversies freeze, why some matters are heard overnight and others vanish into the archive of adjournments. This episode is not about judging the judiciary, it is about understanding the judiciary as a strategic force, not in the sense of partisanship, but in the deeper structural sense. Courts shape national direction through agenda, delay, and design. Let's break it down. Part 1 of this lecture is about what most people never study, the judicial clock. Everyone talks about the judicial mind. Few talk about the judicial clock. What the court chooses to hear in 24 hours, 24 days, or 24 months changes the outcome of national politics. The order may be the same, but the timing decides its impact. Think about this for a moment. If a constitutional challenge is solved after an election, has the court avoided conflict or politics? No, it has shaped politics by choosing the moment of intervention. If a PIL is kept alive for 5 years, its very pendency becomes a tool. Law remains unsettled, policy remains frozen, the state remains hesitant. When a criminal trial involving a high-profile leader is fast-tracked, delayed, or transferred, the judiciary shapes political momentum even if unintentionally. This is not scandal, this is power. Judicial power is not only what the court says, it is when and how it chooses to say it. Part 2 of this chapter is about agenda setting, the silent hand that shapes national priorities. Let's talk about the Supreme Court's most underrated power, the power to decide what deserves attention. Agenda setting is not in the constitution, but it is embedded in practice. Think of these movements. Environmental cases that reshape entire industries, electoral reforms suddenly brought center stage, questions on privacy, Aadhaar, same-sex rights, personal liberty, a sudden listing of political, religious, or ideological flashpoint. Massive economic reforms being held up because the court chooses to hear a batch of petitions first. A suo motu action that recalibrates the executive's urgency. Every time the court selects a case for immediate hearing, it sends a message to the state. This is the country's priority now. The docket is a mirror of national anxiety, but it's also the architect of national direction. Now let's discuss part 3, delay as a strategy. The jurisprudence of patience. People think delay is incompetence. In reality, delay often reveals strategy, deliberate or structure. Look at some patterns. 1. Cases that threaten institutional balance take longer. The court understands the weight of a judgment that can alter executive functioning or parliamentary authority. Delay becomes a form of caution. 2. Cases where social consensus is still forming are spaced out. Judges watch the country evolve. They study shifts in public morality. They avoid being ahead of the curve by a decade. Cases that can disrupt national stability often enter suspended animation. That's the third point. Not dismissed, not decided, just frozen. Because sometimes the safest judgment is no judgment until time matures the dispute, like it happened in the demonetization case. 4. Delay protects the courts too. If the judiciary decides too fast on an issue tied to political change, it risks backlash and loss of legitimacy. Patience becomes a shield. In other words, delay is not always a flaw. Delay is sometimes judicial statecraft. Part 4 of this chapter is about design, how courts write the long history of the republic. There is an invisible architecture beneath every landmark judgment. Not the ratio, not the dissent, but the design. What do I mean by design? 1. Structuring timelines. Example, setting 6 months limit, mandating periodic reporting, or creating milestones for compliance. This forces the executive into a timeline it did not choose. 2. Creating new forums or committees. A committee is not just fact finding, it becomes a parallel institution. It changes the power equation between ministries, regulators, and courts. Third, expanding the scope of a petition. Judicial design can turn a narrow dispute into a transformational one. A PIL about pollution becomes a governance overhaul. A petition on prison rights becomes a criminal justice blueprint. A case on police reforms becomes a reinstall of the entire command structure. 4. Reading the constitution as a living organism. This is where the judiciary plays a long game. Think of basic structure. Think of proportionality. Think of privacy. Think of expansion of Article 21. These ideas were not demanded by the society overnight. They were constructed through judicial design across decades. Judicial design is constitutional national building, brick by brick, case by case, silently, carefully, strategically. Part 5 of this chapter is the case studies. When the judiciary shaped the republic without saying it out loud. Now let's examine patterns through real episode. First, ADM Jabalpur to Puttaswamy, a 40-year arc where judicial philosophy corrected its own excuses. This wasn't just legal evolution, it was a moral recalibration, a deliberate rebuilding of constitutional identity. 2. The 2G coal and spectrum era. Those judgments didn't just punish wrongdoing, they froze entire policy ecosystem. They induced systemic caution in ministries. The political economy changed. Courts didn't just interpret, they reset national economics. Third, the Ayodhya timeline. Years of delay, sudden acceleration, rapid final hearing, a historic judgment. Timing wasn't incidental, it influenced national psychology, political stability, and communal equilibrium. 4. Electoral disqualification matters. Fast-tracked in some eras, slow-tracked in others, this directly shapes the democratic field. Judicial pace becomes political impact. 5. Environmental governance. The court became the de facto regulator. This was judicial design at its peak. Not out of power hunger, out of necessity, because other organs failed to act. These are not isolated incidents. These are signs of judiciary, aware of its strategic role. Part 6 of this chapter is about the meta role, how the judiciary thinks about its own power. Here's the truth most people forget. Judges read history, judges follow politics, judges are aware of their legacy. No judge wants to be remembered as reckless. No judge wants the court to be seen as partisan. No judge wants the institution to lose its moral authority. So the judiciary performs a delicate dance. Step in, step back, step around, step above. This is not ambivalence. This is long-form strategy. Because the judiciary is the last organ that collapses in any republic. It knows this. It behaves accordingly. Part 7 is about the statement's lens, how we must read judicial power. If you work in law, politics, governance, or policy, here's what you need to remember. Judicial power is not isolated. It is relational. It responds to political temperature, social mood, institutional legitimacy, administrative failure, constitutional duty. And because of this, judicial decisions often aim not at the present case, but at the next decade. This is where you shift from being a litigator to a constitutional thinker. Never ask only what is the judgment. Ask what institutional purpose does the judgment serve. That's how you read the judiciary, like a strategist, not a spectator. Now let's have the final word on this chapter and lecture. The judiciary is not an observer of the republic. It is an architect, not elected, not executive, not legislative, but absolutely central. It builds not with budgets or votes, but with time, interpretation, and principles. When the court acts, it derives power. When the court waits, it recalibrates power. When the court intervenes, it distributes power. And when the court designs, it shapes the next chapter of the Indian state. Understanding this is not anti-judiciary. It is the highest respect you can give to the institution, to study it as a force of history. This episode is my attempt to bring that conversation into the open. I am Amol Bidhodi. and you are watching the next hearing. We will meet again in the next episode. Thank you.